Hello and welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List, a podcast about productivity. I'm your host, Eric Fisher, and I'm excited to welcome to the show Jenny Wood. She's a former Google executive, founder of Own Your Career, and an expert in career development and leadership. In this conversation, we're talking about her new book, Wild Courage. Go after what you want and get it. And we talk about why we get stuck, the fears, the failure, the uncertainty that hold us back from pursuing our goals, and why action, instead of overthinking, can create clarity and progress towards those goals, how to ask for what you deserve, whether it's advocating for a raise or a promotion or a career opportunity, you can do it with confidence, and how to take smart risks. So if you need a boost of confidence or a reminder of your own self-agency and advocacy for yourself, or a little push to take some risks, this conversation with Jenny Wood is perfect for you. Well, it is my privilege to welcome to the show Jenny Wood. Jenny, welcome to Beyond the To-Do List.
It is such a joy to be here.
You've got this great brand new book out called Wild Courage. Go after what you want and get it. And obviously, I want to start with the fact that you're a former Google executive. You were the founder of Own Your Career. So you have a lot of career development insight in the mix. I'm curious, how did both those roles or things and projects lead to you seeing through your own experience as well as your own lived experience the reason that you needed to put this book out there?
I think of this as a solution, an offering to people who feel stuck. Like think about something you want right now. It could be a goal, it could be a relationship, it could be a project, and think about what's getting between you and achieving that thing. By the time I started working on Wild Courage, I'd trained tens of thousands of Googlers, non-Googlers, directly and indirectly on leadership, influence, success. And the same theme kept coming up when people felt stuck. And that was their relationship to fear. Fear of failure, fear of uncertainty, fear of judgment of others. And so Wild Courage is it's the process of feeling that fear and taking action anyway. And it's the set of tools that helps you go after what you want and get it. And the reason that those experiences at Google, founding the Own Your Career program, growing from entry level to executive, the reason that led into this is because I saw so many people feel stuck, talented, skilled, exceptional, experienced, well-networked people, right? It's Google. You get the cream of the crop there. They still felt stuck. They felt like they weren't able to be productive and live to their fullest potential, to get promoted, to get raises, to get on the best projects. It pained me so much to see these fantastically talented people staying stuck that I wanted to do something about it.
Well, and one of the things that we hear often when it comes to productivity advice is, okay, I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to focus and I'm going to grind it out and I'm going to just blast forward through my to-do list. But in a lot of ways, that's what leads to being stuck, is because you're so siloed and so tunnel visioned that you're not looking around you at the opportunities that are passing you by, let alone the fact that when you do see them, you feel like you're not prepared for taking that chance.
Can we talk about opportunities that pass you by for a minute with
Yes.
a totally different example? All right. So it's 2011. I'm riding the subway home from work. I'm on the C train. It's dirty. It's crowded. It's packed. And I see this really good looking guy standing about 20 feet away from me. And I want to go up and talk to him, right? He's gorgeous blue eyes, thick brown wavy hair, but something holds me back. And it's those same three fears I referenced: fear of failure. What if he's married? Fear of uncertainty. What if he's a convicted felon? Fear of judgment of others. What if 100 people stare at me on this packed train? So I sit there, I do nothing as the train passes stop after stop. And as this is what made me think of the story, as life passed me by, head down, stuck in the proverbial to-do list, right? Probably looking at my phone, checking things off. But I'm still so taken by him that I make a deal with the universe. And I say, if he gets off at my stop, then I'll try to strike up a conversation with him. And if not, then c'est la vie. He gets off at the next stop, 59th Street, and all of a sudden this wave of wild courage practically washes over me and pushes me out of my subway seat and off the train. And I decide in that moment, I am going to be open to the possibilities, open to the opportunities. I chase after him. I tap him on the shoulder. I say, "Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you. you're wearing gloves, so I can't tell if you're wearing a wedding ring. But in the event that you're not married, you were on my subway and I thought you were cute. Any chance I could give you my business card? And then I wait for what feels like forever, thinking this was a terrible idea. But eventually he takes the card, he calls the next day, we go on a date a week later. 3 years later, we're getting married. And now we've been married happily for 11 years with 2 little hooligans, ages 7 and 9. So bring this up because I could not agree more with, productivity is not necessarily powering through the to-do list. It's opening yourself up to possibilities. It's pushing past the fear to take action. It's recognizing that action, not thinking, provides clarity, and clarity opens the door to productivity.
Yeah, and you even talk about this in the book where it's not about waiting for the right moment because there's never the right moment. You're talking about taking bold steps, even making mistakes. Like what? In other words, if he had a wedding ring on, which I'm glad for you, he did not.
Me too. He's so great. He's with the kids right now while I'm in the city launching this book.
But even if he had one on, you said, if this happens, then I'm going to do this. And you followed through, and the worst that could happen would have been, oh yeah, sorry. And then you just get back, or it was your stop anyway. So you were getting off anyway.
No, it was actually 12 blocks before my stop. So I changed on a dime, but it makes it even more powerful. So my stop was 72nd Street. His was 59th Street. I walked home 12 blocks in a blizzard. But you know what? If he had said no of those 3 fears, fear of failure, fear of uncertainty, fear of judgment, I'm particularly plagued by fear of uncertainty. So I'd rather have no, but have it be definitive than sit there wondering for the rest of my life, what could have been? Should I have done it? Right? Dan Pink says in The Power of Regret, something along the lines of, we regret the moves not taken much more than the outcome of the moves we do take. And that relates to the reckless chapter of my book, which is one of the 9 traits of wild courage.
Yeah. Well, and there's also this echo of, you still had this interval time before he called, right? He said, sure, I'll take the card. You gave it. Then you walked home in the blizzard, and then it wasn't till the next day. So you had this flexible window of 24 hours where you still could live with confidence in that, okay, I tried, I did it, I stepped up, and you didn't know what the answer was going to be. Luckily, it wasn't that long.
Yeah, but think sometimes, it could be, depending on the situation, a job interview, asking your boss for a raise, raising your hand to be on a big flagship project at work. Sometimes that interval can be days or weeks or months, and it can be very hard to push through that uncertainty. But again, like you mentioned, there's so much goodness that comes out of taking action. I flexed my boldness muscle. I stepped out of my comfort zone. The fact that if you take 100 shots, you might get one of them, right? Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So there's maybe my approach was wrong. Maybe he said no, or he didn't call. And then I revisit how I approached him, right? And again, I'm using this very unusual example of chasing a stranger off the subway to meet them. But think about all the other ways that we take risks in life. I've got this big book coming out with Penguin Random House. I am gunning to promote this, and it's so much work, and it is rife with rejection. I am a keynote speaker, and so when the book was available for advanced copies, I had sent out 300 to prospective clients, Fortune 500 companies where I could be a consultant or a workshop facilitator or a keynote speaker, thinking oh, well, everyone's just going to find me immediately and hire me for a keynote speech. And then I was like, I guess I have to follow up. I sent the first 200 emails to follow up and say, hey, did you get the book? Do you like it? Do you have any interest in me adding value to your company? Sent out the first 200, and the response was not people knocking down my door. And so it's this is a much longer interval of the uncertainty and the waiting and the ghosting and the rejection, which I think is just what scares people from taking action. And I have to say, it was very hard for me to send that last 100 emails. And I had to push through all those fears and tap into my own wild courage to keep going when I didn't get the answers I wanted every time. On that subway that day, I did get a wonderful answer and a wonderful life and a wonderful marriage and family, but there's so many times that I don't, and I have to push through my own fear. And it is legitimately hard to have wild courage and to keep pushing no matter what the situation, work, life, relationships, friendships.
Well, ultimately, it's a question of who do we want to be? It's not just about what we want, but it's the who behind it. And that's what you get at with these traits that you talk about with being weird and and some of these traits. Before I get into these traits, by the way, I want to say some of these words can be, I hate using the word triggering, but it's that there's a preconceived notion in a negative kind of tainting when a word has been used in a negative way so often, like the word manipulative, for example, or nosy or obsessed or shameless. Actually, all of them kind of come across that way. It's funny now that it's registering now. It's like, wait a second, you start with weird and go selfish, shameless, obsessed, nosy, manipulative, and I'm like, brutal, reckless, and bossy. I'm like, of course those all seem like negative things, but you spin them in a positive way because it takes this kind of bucking the system, or I should say bucking other people's expectations and really relying on who it is you're deciding to be.
It's provocative by design, right? These are classically negative traits, but in reality, they create the bars of an invisible cage that keep us small, that keep us quiet, that keep us following instead of leading. And this gets to that third fear, the fear of judgment, because sometimes when we don't take action, when we don't send those last 100 pitch emails that we know could yield productive conversations and mutual value exchange for a company and money for us, right? Or we don't chase the cute stranger off the subway, oftentimes it's because we don't want to be perceived as blank, perceived as XYZ label, right? Those blanks being weird or selfish or shameless or bossy. But when we reclaim this language, these ideas, we are able to dial up our confidence, kick our imposter syndrome to the curb, and live less in fear that, someone might judge us as these things. It's almost like you think of advice that you'd give a friend. Let's say the company has downsized and now they're responsible for the roles of 3 different people, right? But with no different title, no pay. You'd say to your friend, well, why don't you, you should not demand, but you should go advocate for yourself and go ask for more pay or ask for a different title or whatever it is. Be recognized for your contributions and your value. But sometimes we don't take this advice ourselves. And so that's where I put a little heat on older, more traditional words and call them, be a little bit shameless, be a little bit selfish, because you would tell a friend, shamelessly ask for it, be a little bit selfish about what you need. You're working hard. You deserve the extra pay or whatever it is. So the old versions of them, they all have a translation. So weird would be authentic, selfish, self-advocacy, shameless confidence, manipulative relationship building, etc.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's the way to go with this, is that you've got to look at what these are in terms of the instant kind of feeling you get from them, but then realize that they actually, this is slang, and it's like slang words, in other words, versus the true definition.
Yeah, it's reclaiming them in a fun way that helps people think about it differently and pay a little bit of attention, because we're tired of those old words, right? We've heard leadership, which I call bossy. We've heard authenticity, again, which I call weird, so many times that sometimes they lose their potency.
Well, let's talk about that authenticity, because I think that, or the word weird, you start the book with that and you talk about all of the ways that essentially we can be authentic or we can conform. And there's kind of a balance there, because for a lot of us, we're working in an organization and there's a culture that exists already and we want to go along with it, but we also want to make sure that we're having agency for ourselves. How would you suggest we go along as well as stand out? Yeah,
so imagine you're the intern, right, at an organization, and you're there for a summer internship. If you just want that internship on your resume for the 3-month stint, then sure, be a lemming and just wear the expected business casual attire and, show up to every meeting and nod along. But if you want to get that job offer among the 20 highly qualified interns who are also competing for that full-time offer in the fall, then perhaps you thoughtfully disagree in a meeting and offer a different perspective, or you raise your hand and ask a question in the town hall where the VP is leading and opens it up for questions, or you say to your manager for the internship, hey, I see us doing it this way. Here are 3 different options of how else we could do this, and here's my perspective on which of those 3 options is the best. I call that give 3 options, have a POV. And it's like, it is such simple stuff. Or maybe you're quote unquote weird by sending your manager what I call a Monday manifesto, 4 bullets, 2 things you're proud of that you did last week and 2 things that you're excited to work on this week. Is it weird? No, it's not weird bad, but is it weird because no one else is doing it? Like, yeah, and that's okay. So you can fit in certain ways, right? You can get along with your peers, you can be a team player, but you can also dial it up a little bit and not be scared to play it hot. These are things that maybe wouldn't typically be expected of an intern, but they're good things that are going to make you look like a rock star and help you get that full-time offer at the end of the summer.
One of the ways that you exemplify this breaking of social norms while not becoming unprofessional is through the red sneakers effect. Talk a little bit about that.
There's this study out of Harvard that suggests that if you wear red sneakers with a tuxedo, you're perceived as being higher in status and higher in class. Now, you have to be mindful of it, right? If you wear a wrinkled suit to a fancy restaurant and old torn sneakers, it won't have the same je ne sais quoi. When we make intentional moves to stand out, you are perceived as higher in status, because that's the kind of move that like a rock star would make, right? Like red sneakers with a tux at an art gallery opening. Like they must be super important. So when you take bold moves like that, people then perceive you as being elevated or important or talented or skilled or someone at least willing to take the risk to stand out, which can, lead to trusting relationships and to job offers and to project offers or new opportunities because of the air that you're putting out. That is a great example. Thank you for bringing it up, of how to be weird in the right way. And I'm not saying everyone should go out and buy red sneakers and pair them with a tux, but it is, though I do have sparkly sneakers on today, which I absolutely love.
So one of the other things that I'm thinking of here, we use this example of the intern. Well, what if you're already in the organization, and this is one of those things where, like, for example, you had a very bold salary ask at one point, and so you're already embedded, you're already internal, but you're worth more than you're getting. And there's another example in the book as well that kind of pairs along with that, where you stand up and you ask for a significant raise. Oftentimes we don't think to ask for the raise. We think, oh, I'll just plug along and do what I'm told and prove myself, and my work will speak for itself. But often that is not what happens.
Yeah, the biggest lie you've been told in your career is that just keep your head down. Your work will speak for itself. Going back to that example I shared about the advice you'd give a friend, right? Of, let's say there were layoffs, you're now doing the work of 2 or 3 people. This is a tool I love called Play to Win, WINN, what I need now. And, maybe a year ago, you didn't need a raise because you were doing some regular amount of work, but now you do need a raise because you're doing more work. And the story I share here is from a hired singer, just a session singer, which means that she was just brought in for this one song to vocalize on this one song. Her name is Claire Torrey, and she was brought in by Pink Floyd to record these vocals for the Dark Side of the Moon album. She collected a 30-pound fee and headed out, and that was it. She didn't even know that the vocals she had sung for Great Gig in the Sky, a song on the album Dark Side of the Moon, had made it to the album until it was live and she heard it. Well, that album went platinum 14 times over. So what did she do? She got selfish. She said, I've got to play to win, what I need now. She took them to court, and then they settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. I'm guessing that sum was more than 30 pounds. So she played to win, and you can too, whether it's asking for a raise or asking for a promotion, or let's say your partner's company goes work from home 5 days a week and you're still commuting to the office 3 days a week. Maybe last year you did the laundry or had more household responsibilities, and now you need to play to win and ask if they can do more of the household chores. Or a couple weeks ago, my husband and I were flying somewhere with our 2 kids. We had a configuration of 3 seats in one row and then 1 single seat. It was a chill time for my husband at work, and I was prepping for this book launch and prepping for a keynote with a company I was super excited to work with. And rather than splitting the flight 2 hours and 2 hours, single seat for one of us and with the kids for the other, I said, can you take the kids the whole flight? Call it selfish, but I was playing to win. What I need now is to have this 4-hour work block on this flight. And that makes sense for our relationship right now and our relative work responsibilities.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't do it. A lot of people feel guilty or feel bad or have a hard time having the courage to stand up for what they want in any given moment.
Yeah, and often they'll compensate and say, well, I feel bad asking, so maybe what I need to do is not just, they buy into the lie where my work will speak for itself. And instead of doing the ask, they say, oh, I'll show them, I'll take on more work. And then they end up burnt out.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually love something else you said about feeling guilty asking. if I do a 10-year anniversary edition, I will add this to the book because it would also fall under selfish. And I call it the pitch pullback. And that's where you ask somebody for a favor, but then you pull it back with language that softens it so much that it almost loses its power of the ask. So for example, I asked a friend, I texted a mom friend and I said, hey, Ollie is going to the birthday party. I can't take Ari. Any chance that you could bring Ari with you? But then in the same text, I said, but no worries if you can't. I totally understand. You're busy too. So I pitched, can you take Ari to the party? And then I pulled back saying, oh, but don't worry. I'm sure you're busy. You don't have to. Like, she knows she can say no. Why did I feel the need to pull back on the pitch? I should have confidently let it hang. And then, of course, the balance of that is you want to be mindful of the relationship. You don't want to be thoughtful in the way you ask. But I always assume like people will say no if they can't do something. And that's okay.
Yeah. And in fact, it even weakens the initial pitch because
Totally.
they think you don't really care if you're going to backpedal that much out of it.
Yeah. Why give someone an easy out if you're asking for them to do something? Ask thoughtfully, ask respectfully, but you can just make the request and then drop the mic.
Yeah. You can, if they say no, which often they will, and I'm glad that they do, because I mean, again, just the bold ask isn't going to get a yes every single time. We should be upfront about that. But when the no comes, part of training to get a yes later for a different ask is in how you respond to them about their no.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the reality is that when you get each of those no's, it's spine straightening, right? And it's skin thickening, and it can be a good thing that leads to more opportunities in the future because of course you're not going to always win every shot they take, but then you were fine. Like the example of, okay, so if John had said no on the subway, I would have thought, okay, well, how could I have approached him differently? Or actually, maybe it's a better example to think about these pitches for keynotes. Was I clear enough in my offering? Was I succinct enough? Did I say my keynote fee when I should have asked them their budget first? Am I overpriced? Am I underpriced? Like there are all these different factors, like 30, 40, 50 different factors that could impact someone saying yes or no. And then those no's help you refine it. And by the way, it's extra special if you feel comfortable asking for feedback, even from someone you don't know very well, like, hey, I'm curious, what would have made this a yes for you? Or how could I tweak this in the future? Which I think can be very powerful. And people wouldn't think to do that. I would put this under the shameless heading where people think, okay, I got the no, I didn't get the job, I didn't get the project, I didn't get the offer, I didn't get the date, and just move on. But there's a lot that can be learned. And a lot of people often will give you a little bit of feedback. Not everyone, for sure, but you can learn really interesting things from that.
Yeah, there's a lot there to be learned in that vein of the shameless attribute trait that essentially we don't have enough confidence in ourselves to stand up and be proud of our accomplishments, or, we're high achievers and yet even then we struggle to take credit for our own work. Like you were talking about in the pitch, it's like, you know what? It makes a lot of sense to make sure that you are practical way walking that line between confidence and arrogance and making sure that you stay on the right side of it. But, it's almost be bold with writing the pitch first, then reread it and say, okay, it's all truthful, but maybe the wording, the clarity of the message is what needs to be tweaked, or the tone, I should say.
For sure. And then also just recognizing all the external factors that don't have to do with you, right? So it's what oftentimes blocks us, I keep going back to those three fears. We are our own blocker. And then we think, oh, well, it's me. I'm not good enough. I'm not skilled enough. I'm not experienced enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm not well networked enough. But let's say you're applying for a job and you get a rejection. There are, I did tons of hiring as a Google executive, and I would have phenomenal candidates, but it wasn't the right skill fit, or it wasn't the right level, or, they weren't the right fit for the team, right? There's even personality things that you have to think about. And so even just recognizing that it's not personal. And, if somebody doesn't bring me in for a keynote, it doesn't mean that I'm a bad person, or my keynote's not good, or my book's not big enough yet. That's a great, by the way, shameless tactic, is to add the word yet to the end of any sentence that starts with I can't, or I'm not a successful enough keynote speaker, or my book hasn't, hit the New York Times bestseller, or I am not a good team leader. If you add the word yet to the end, I'm not a top keynote speaker yet. My book hasn't hit the New York Times times yet. I'm not the leader I want to be yet. That in and of itself is an incredibly powerful antidote to imposter syndrome. It helps you be shameless in all the right ways. And yes, there is a such thing as taking these traits too far. I call those trait traps, and you do want to be mindful. But I do find that for the majority of people, the bigger issue is they don't dial the confidence up enough. They have too much imposter syndrome, which is natural. Like I do also, tons of it. I've given a few examples here about things I'm actually struggling with as a new entrepreneur and much more insecure than I was as a Google executive, where I felt like I had all this credibility and this reputation and led this huge program and ran this awesome operations team. I feel it all day long. The fear, the imposter syndrome, the gremlins, is this going to work? Why did I do this? Did I make a terrible decision leaving Google? And so like me, I think others struggle more with I'm not good enough. I'm scared to take action. What if it doesn't work? I lose my ability to be productive because I'm living in fear. To me, again, that is the blocker. It's time boxing. It's great. The to-do list, it's great. Itemizing your to-do list, sure. The 4 Ds, delay, drop, delegate, do, yes, it's all good stuff. But I fundamentally feel that what blocks you, those are good to have. But the biggest enemy to me is getting in my own way and picking the easy thing to do on any given day. Like last night, I knew I needed to be memorizing my keynote, this one section that's new for my Google keynote tomorrow that I'm doing as their keynote for International Women's Day. I knew that's what I needed to be doing, but it was hard and I was scared and I was picturing myself up there and flubbing the words and saying it wrong. And I was just nervous about the whole event in general. And so what did I do instead? I picked easy things to check off the to-do list. I picked small stuff. I picked responding to people in my inbox, just delaying what was the big, scary, meaty thing I had to do. So again, to me, it wasn't the time blocking or the way I handled my to-do list. It was just the fear because that was the scarier project, even though that's what I should have done first.
We can all relate to that. We can all say that you know what? I'll do some easy stuff as a warm up. And then,
totally.
That's one of the justifying things.
Get my head in the game. But then 3 hours later, that's it. Your work block is gone and you never did the big thing because we're scared. And I am too.
And the thing is that it's not that it ever truly goes away. I mean, you've done step after step after step of stepping up. One of the things that I've noticed that you talk about is getting over that discomfort of self-promotion is to reframe it. And so one of the things that you did was you were reframing, instead of I'm so great, let me come speak for you or do this workshop for you. Instead, it's you're sharing valuable insights. You have something to offer.
Well, and not only that, but you totally teed up one of my favorite tools, which is called Woo with You. And I would say this is even something that falls under what I would call manipulative, building relationships through empathy and in a way that lasts and that you provide mutual value exchange. So let's say in that email, I said, actually, this happened once. It was after a keynote I gave and someone sent me a gift basket. It was lovely. And so my first draft of the email, every single sentence started with I. Well, this tool is called Woo with You. Flip all of your I statements to you statements whenever you're trying to influence someone or build a relationship or even just win their favor, right? So it said something like, I loved the gift basket you sent. I had so much fun doing this keynote for your team. I am excited to pilot this new leadership training I have if you're interested. And I looked at that draft and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so focused on me. What if I just did a quick flipping from I to you with you? So I rewrote it and it said, you sent the most delicious gift basket. Your team was a dream to partner with. You have such an incredible set of leaders that if I can add value by coming in and doing my manager training, I'd be delighted to do so. And think about the difference of how it feels to receive that. I got one the other day from someone who came to a masterclass on negotiations. And I think she was doing this intentionally, but if she was or she wasn't, it felt so good to read. The first line of the DM from her on LinkedIn was, you were radiant in that masterclass. And I was like, oh, I love it. Whatever you have to say next, I'm all ears because it honestly felt good. I have an ego. You have an ego. It's nice to share a compliment with someone and make them look like the hero, not you. That helps you win the business. That helps you build the relationship. And that helps you manipulate a situation into one where you are winning and they are too.
And it comes across as, and in fact, it might actually be talking with them instead of at them.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And which is one of my favorite tools from the Bossy chapter, which is just the courage to listen and lead. And that, when you listen with humility, listening to understand, not just to respond, that is what builds depth of relationship as a leader or as any partner or friend.
One of the things that, I don't think a lot of people will ask you is you're using this word brutal as one of the traits. And this is definitely a productivity word in my mind, or at least the way that you refer to it with a sub-chapter title of drawing lines and sticking to them. And I think this is something that a lot of people that are thinking about productivity, they're thinking of boundaries and, I've got to put boundaries in place because I have a tendency to overwork. I have a tendency to burn out. I want to put out a lot more feelers for all these things I want to do, but they also are afraid because they think they're going to overcommit. How do we balance that?
Yeah. So you say yes to the big and you say no to the small. And this is so hard to do for me, for you, for anybody listening or watching. So what's big? Big is, let's take this in a work context, for example. Big is the marquee strategy project for H2 that's important to your VP and important to the company and important for your career. It's increasing customer satisfaction, 12% year-over-year growth. Or if you work at an ice cream company, it's launching that new vegan vanilla ice cream line. Like, that's big. What's small is being the 18th person to reply all on the happy birthday Jimmy email, or going to every meeting where you neither add value nor derive value, or saying yes every time someone says, hey, can you hop on a quick call, because you feel bad saying no. Brutal is the courage to have boundaries, to protect your time, your energy, and your priorities. And it's the power of no, because people pleasing pleases no one, and it keeps you small. It keeps you scared. Brutality is much cleaner. It's actually far kinder in the end. And it's something that's very hard for people to leverage. Me too. And it can be protecting your time, right? It can be being mindful of saying yes to the big and no to the small, which, by the way, if you say yes to too many small things, that's what I call nap work. My mom actually coined this term. It stands for not actually promotable. Always saying yes to be the person to plan the offsite, always saying yes to organizing the company holiday party, always saying yes to taking notes in the meeting, right? We all want to be team players. That stuff matters for culture and for collaboration and for teamwork. But if you're always the person who is leaned on for that, then mind the balance, right? You dial that nap work, that small stuff, back by maybe 10% so you can put your thumb on the scale for the big stuff if you're doing more than, let's say, 20, 30% nap work in any given quarter. So say yes to the big, say no to the small, be mindful of nap work, but that's really about being brutal about your time. There's also an element of being brutal about your words and your decisions. For example, my good friend Kim called off her wedding 3 days before the wedding. That was not an easy call for her to make. That was brutal seeming, right? But what's better, to have an awkward conversation, a brutal conversation 3 days before the wedding and send back the gifts and see if you can get your deposit back on the caterer, or 3 years in an unhappy marriage? Unfortunately, I find that people feel so uncomfortable having these brutal or candid or, challenging conversations, and they'll suffer for 3 years of an unhappy relationship with a spouse or a colleague or a friend because they won't have the hard 3-minute conversation. So you can be brutal about your calendar. You can also be brutal with your words in a thoughtful way. Or if you're a manager and you're delivering a performance review, I once went into my performance review meeting and it took 7 minutes of preamble before we got to the actual score that quarter. And I was so stressed out. And I wish my manager had just been brutal and told me the score right away. And the score was fine, but it was a painful 7 minutes leading up to it. So if you're delivering bad news, if you've got to be brutal about something, say it within the first 90 seconds, tear off the Band-Aid, ouch, move on. Again, like, brutality is kind, clear is kind.
Yeah, you say that, and it's all about clarity, that you know already what it is that you do or do not want to do.
Yes.
And you even say this in the book, that most successful people don't do all the things or most things. They do the most important things. And so it's that delineation, it's that differentiation, it's that clarity that, and it's funny, you use the word kindness, which a lot of people would say, well, that's the opposite of brutal. No, you're being truthful, you're being upfront. Yeah. Most people aren't used to, people being plain spoken or clear spoken, I should say. And so they have to navigate, what are they really saying here? They'll think you're a fresh breath of air because you're telling them the truth for once.
Yeah, and it might sting in the moment, right? It probably will. But then everybody can move on with a very clear picture of where things stand, right? If you're in a relationship, most people say, oh, I think we should talk. I'm not sure how I feel about this relationship anymore. But what they really mean is it's over. I'm moving out, right? And so this can go on for days, for weeks, for months in this kind of uncertain area. And I think most people would agree, even though it's really hard to have these candid conversations, ultimately everyone's better off when there is the cleanness of the people who have the wild courage to say things clearly, say them plainly, say them in the first 90 seconds, for example.
Well, the only wrong decision is making no decision.
And again, we regret the inaction, I think, more than the action. Again, I think that when fear is the root, when we lack wild courage, the input stops the output. So if the goal is closing the gap between input and output, then to me, there is an element of no action in there. It's like if fear is the blocker, if you lack the wild courage, then that will stop you from action. You literally will freeze. And I've been there. I'm still there regularly, like every day, every week in certain situations. But that is a blocker to productivity. And to me, the biggest blocker to productivity is inaction.
And in fact, that really brings to mind one thing that was kind of a lingering overall or overarching theme for me that this book is when it comes to the topic of productivity is that bottleneck effect. We are our own bottleneck in so many ways. And you're coming at that as the main core problem from all these different possible angles. And I mean, we do all of them. You know, for example, one of the other things that we do is we err on the side of not acting instead of acting, right? And yet that's yet another bottleneck. It's everything is, you know, it's a clogged drain. It's because we're overthinking, we're overfeeling, we're not acting at all. And so how do we get out of that analysis paralysis?
Right. So I can relate to this because this is probably the hardest trait. This is the reckless trait. It's the courage to take healthy risks. You know, when you're on the fence, think fast and fearless, do it. Better to take some action than spend, you know, all your days analyzing the possible outcome of every mistake. So that is the goal of reckless. But this one is the hardest one for me, I will admit. I was hiking with some friends in Montana and they were ahead of me on the trail and there was a park ranger, and I was trying to optimize to pick the best path. And I was like, okay, well, which one has more construction? They were doing some construction. Which one has the nicer view? Is one of the paths muddier than the other? Which has more elevation gain? So, you know, I can get a good workout. Is this one out and back or is it a loop? And my friends up ahead were like, Jenny, it's all gorgeous. Come on, just start walking. But that just start walking can be hard for so many of us. You know, maybe we're out hiking. Maybe we're analyzing which industry to move to if we're not happy in our job. Maybe we're deciding whether you should or should not ask your boss for something, or you should or should not break up with somebody. The analysis paralysis can be plaguing. And so because that was an example from hiking, I call this move, then map, right? Again, action, not thinking, provides clarity. So if you start moving, you kind of live into the answer. Do you like this path, right? Or this job or this industry? Is it muddy or is it feeling good? Are there politics at the company you can't deal with and you navigate through that? But sitting there and trying to do just endless pro-con lists will again result in inaction. The trait trap of reckless, taking it too far, would be doing things that are dangerous, you know, physically dangerous or emotionally dangerous. Sign on the bottom line and pay your taxes on time. Don't be reckless there. But, you know, when it comes to life's big moves and big adventures, take a risk and bet on yourself. Go move to Paris for that semester abroad. Change industries and try your hand in marketing if you've always done sales. Lean into AI and take an online course. See what you can recklessly learn as you get a sense of, you know, where you might be able to bolster your skills with more AI knowledge. That's what I mean by reckless.
Yeah. And we have this kind of delusional sense that, oh, you know what? If I gather more information, then I can have certainty. I don't believe certainty is even a possibility, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, here's the real way to gather more data. Take an action.
Just go do it.
And then you take that step, and then you've got another perspective, another view, another data point. And so then you're doing that smart risk taking instead of, because you're not advocating, when you say reckless, you're not saying, have reckless ignorance and just go do all of it. No, you're saying smart risk taking.
Yeah, exactly. This just came up on another conversation I had. Yeah, intelligent risk taking, and the idea is to get out of the analysis paralysis. It was incredibly hard for me to leave Google. I had this awesome job and I loved my team, and I thought I'd retire at Google, being there for another 15 years. And because I had all this pressure being the breadwinner for my family and feeling like we had so much stability, it was hard for me to be reckless and think, okay, well, what if there's something else out there? But I had to separate the truths from the tales. Again, I was my own worst enemy, spending a year going back and forth making this decision. And I wish I could have that year back. And I wish I had been reckless sooner and just, decided to go for it sooner. But I had to separate the truths from the tales. So truths are verifiable facts. Tales are the stories we create to make sense of those truths. So what were the truths of this conundrum for me? I would be leaving Google. I would no longer be employed there. I would be making less money, most likely, my first year, out of Google, would be a writer and a keynote speaker. But what were the tales that I created that made it so hard for me to take that reckless move or take action or bet on myself or take this exciting risk? Well, one tale was my parents are going to be disappointed in me because they're going to think that I'm, going to be a starving artist. We're going to have to move out of our beautiful house in Boulder and downsize because we'll never make money again. My kids are going to be mad because they love coming to Google and getting all the free snacks. I'll never get hired anywhere again because I'm 45 and I will have had this gap, with no employment as I go focus on my book and bring this to companies and to organizations and people. So like all those four things I just said, tale. But it keeps you scared. It keeps you small. And when you recognize, first of all, the truths versus the tales, the verifiable facts versus these stories you're creating that hold you back. And then after you recognize them, you can rewrite the tale. You don't have to be a Pollyanna and say, no, it's going to be amazing and I'm going to be a billionaire and be flying private jets to all my keynotes. You don't have to take it that far, but you can at least tell yourself a neutral tale, like, I can do this for 2 years. I probably am pretty employable still, maybe even more employable after a Google exec role and putting a big book out into the world. I bet I can get another job. So if this doesn't work 2 years down the line, that is a really great backup plan. And that is a story that I told myself, a tale, a new, more empowering tale that allowed me to take this reckless move.
Well, and a narrative like that is an ongoing story, much like how there's you've given a couple examples of pivotal moments from your own experience where you followed through, not knowing what the outcome was going to be, and have hindsight now to be able to look back and, decipher, discern, and share those experiences in hopes of stirring others on. But it's a daily lived out story of a thing. Courage is a thing that we're going to have to walk in daily by choice.
Little courage deposits. Absolutely. Yes. And one of those 100 emails I sent out to actually, this was different. This was asking a fellow author to promote my book, which, when a book comes out, authors have author friends and they always hope that they'll help endorse the book or put it out there, to their audience. And I got an email back that wasn't just neutral. It wasn't just a polite no. It wasn't ghosting with no response. It was a bona fide, Jenny, you pushed it too far, and I don't like that you asked this of me. This is a very famous author that everybody would recognize this name. And it was really, really hard. And I was really disappointed in myself. But at the end of the day, I was living my values. And that's the worst case scenario, right? Is you get a very upsetting email. This was a very upsetting email that was very strongly worded. And it told me that I fell into a trait trap, that I pushed it too far and I didn't read the room appropriately, knowing that this particular person with this size audience actually would not appreciate the ask. And so sometimes you do get your wrist slapped, or it does impact a friendship or a mentorship or a relationship or a business relationship. But that's okay. You can move on. I'm still recovering from it. But I want to acknowledge that it is hard and you can still push through with these little courage deposits every day, because it's not like I live with wild courage and never have hard moments. I do every hour.
Yes. Well, and it's one of those things where, again, this is an example of a misstep, but that's a stepping stone. You're sharing that, actually, that you're, transparent enough to say it's hard. Wished it didn't happen, but how can that's a call for me to check myself and make sure I read the room better moving forward.
Yeah. And I love Annie Duke's work on thinking in bets, where she opens that book with like this football Super Bowl final play where the coach makes this call and then the outcome isn't what they want. They lose the game. And then in the next day, all over the papers, it says, Coach XYZ makes terrible call. But Annie Duke argues in her work that no, the call was good based on the weather, the players, the play, the history of the success of this play. The call was correct. The outcome was undesirable. And so even looking back on that, I still haven't decided, because this is a pretty fresh wound for me. I haven't decided if I made the wrong choice and I think I probably did make the wrong choice, but there might be other times where it's still the right choice, even if the outcome is not what you would like.
Yes, exactly.
That the decision was still correct, because otherwise you'd say, oh, I didn't get the outcome I wanted. I should never do this again. What I want is to encourage people to keep doing it, do it in the right way, tweak, refine your approach. And when you're asking somebody for something or pitching or building relationships or whatever it is, or betting on yourself, refine the approach. But I do think more people, again, need to dial up their wild courage as opposed to get a no and never attempt to have wild courage again.
Yeah, don't let that send you into the spiral of analysis paralysis all over again.
Yeah, exactly. And I definitely did not sleep well that night. This was just a few nights ago. It still stings, clearly.
So clearly, there's not some like you take one chance and it goes right and it's a happily ever after. This is an ongoing lifestyle, and you learn to grow into these attributes, these traits. Yes. In hopes that you're learning and lifelong learning how to be fearless, even in the face of fear, and have wild courage. Jenny, I have loved talking with you. I love this book, and I love what it's going to do for everybody that's going to pick it up. I want to start pointing people to where they can find out more about you and what you're working on, as well as where they can grab the book and all the good things that come along with it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the book's available everywhere. A hardcover, audiobook, ebook. Pick up the hardcover. It's the kind of book you're going to want to take notes in. So if you're indifferent to format, it is a great book to read in hardcover. I love giving free stuff to listeners. So I have an awesome guide of tips and tricks and scripts to help you say no. This goes back to being selfish and being brutal in the right ways. So that's at itsjennywood.com/say no, because it's hard to say no to projects and favors and meetings. And this gives you the language to do it in a really thoughtful way that makes you not look like a jerk. So that's itsjennywood.com/say no.
Perfect. And I'll list all of those things in the show notes for this episode. Jenny, it's been great talking with you. Thank you so much for having the courage to write this book and for sharing your experience and insights with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. This book did take courage because I could get canceled for it, right? This is definitely pushing the envelope with a chapter called manipulative and one called selfish, but I'm going for it and we'll see what happens.
We're going to redefine those words. So thank you again, Jenny, for sharing, and everybody go grab the book.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, that's another podcast crossed off your listening to-do list. I hope that you got a nudge and or reminder of the agency that you do have in your life. And even if you don't have any certainty as to how things are going to turn out, that taking those risks the smart way, as Jenny would say, can help you get more of what you're wanting to get out of life. I know so many of us don't take even small steps or risks at all. And so much about living a productive life is about taking action, and we're so scared to take action sometimes and just stick with the regular list of things we're doing that I get it. It can be hard. It can be tough. I'm taking some risks currently right now in my own life. So I would encourage you to do the same. If you found this episode helpful, I would love for you to share it with somebody you know needs to hear it. Go to the show notes at beyondthetodolist.com or hit that share button in your podcast player app of choice, wherever you're listening to this right now. Send it on over to somebody. Let them know you were thinking of them and that you think they could use a little courage in their life. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next episode.